Joe Blackburn from Whistle Pearlstein here on behalf of the applicants, Deluca Construction, with respect to their application concerning the property located at 7020 Bridge Road. The subject property consists of just over 3 acres in area and is located in the CM Conservation Management Zone District. As presently constituted, the property is improved with an approximately 2.5-story existing single-family detached dwelling, a 2-story residential accessory dwelling. I'm sorry, guys. A 2-story residential accessory dwelling, which is also the current home to an accessory apartment, and a detached barn. For purposes of further orientation, just kind of a zoomed out site. Subject site is presently located almost smack dab in the middle of the Newtown Meadows, Devonshire Meadows, and Nob Hill communities, which in the aggregate contain 140 single-family detached dwelling units, ranging in area from 16,000 square feet, which is just a tick over 0.3 acres, to 39,000 square feet, which is 0.9 acres on the dot. So surrounded by 140 units, less than 1 acre. As a part of applicant's application before you this evening, which will also ultimately be the subject of subdivision, applicant is proposing to demolish the existing dwellings and structures on the property, and in their place subdivide the property into effectively 2 mirror image lots, each consisting of 1.5 acres, and each of which would be improved with a single-family detached dwelling. For purposes of brief further background before we get into the scope of relief necessary to accommodate this level of development, and some members of the Planning Commission may remember, but several years ago there was an effort by the still fee simple owner of the property, an LLC, which the principal of that was made by the name of Gary Page. And Gary made an extended effort to subdivide the property into 3 lots. We had extensive dialogue and conversations and discussions with the surrounding neighbors with the propriety of that development, and the rallying cry that we repeatedly heard was, can't you do 2, can't you do 2, can't you do 2? Unfortunately, Gary ended up passing before bringing that project to conclusion, and it has lain dormant since that time. The current applicant is the equitable owner of the property, and guided largely by our suggestion as to what has previously been indicated or suggested would be a more well-received application, is presently proposing the current 2-lot subdivision that you see before you this evening. As I mentioned, that would obviously be the subject of a formal subdivision and land development application in the future, but for the purposes of tonight's consideration, there are a number of items of zoning relief that would be necessary to accommodate even this 2-lot subdivision. I would assume it goes without saying, but the scope of relief that we'll briefly run through and then we can answer any questions on is obviously substantially the same, although less intense than that which was the subject of the pending application years ago made by Gary for the 3-lot subdivision. And they are the scope of variances that you would anticipate requiring when applying bulk zoning criteria that are intended to apply to a 3-acre lot minimum to a 1.5 acre lot minimum. That said, the 1.5 acre lot minimum would still be upwards of 4 and even 5 times the size of the lots in that area, which range again from 16,000 square feet, which is 0.3 acres, to 39,000 square feet, which is still 0.9 acres, and both of our lots are 1.5. So against that backdrop, I can run through the items of zoning relief briefly and then answer any questions, and feel free to obviously stop me if any of them warrant discussion as we go through. The first of which is obviously, as I alluded to at the outset, that this is in the CM district, which, as I'm sure we all know, requires a 3-acre lot minimum, and we are proposing 2 1.5 acre lots. The second item of relief is to permit 160-foot to 160-foot lot widths where again, on a 3-acre lot, the minimum required in the CM district is 200 feet. That said, 160 feet for a 1.5-acre lot is far in excess of what I think would reasonably be expected, and you know, a factor of multiples larger than, again, all those properties that we saw, you know, in the Nob Devonshire, and Newtown Meadows communities, which are, you know, in the 50 to 90 range, plus or minus. Third item of relief is to permit a building separation of 82 feet, just shy of 83 feet, where 100 feet is otherwise required. I would note that this condition only exists between the two proposed buildings. The setbacks are not, or that setback, or that reduced building separation rather, is not from any existing building or around the vicinity. It is only for the proposed two structures. An additional side yard setback, to permit a side yard setback of 33 feet where 50 is required. This condition exists solely on this, what I'll call the southern boundary of Lot B, and it should be noted that this is in fact a side yard, notwithstanding Declaration Drive, because there is an approximately, and I know you can't see it here, it's on the plans we submitted, but there is about a 20-foot strip of homeowners association land there for the Devonshire Meadows community. So we do not maintain frontage on Declaration Drive. But what that also affords is, you know, a more than 50-foot actual setback from the cartway, or excuse me, from the right-of-way, and a well in excess of 50-foot setback from the cartway of Declaration Drive. So although that setback does exist, it is from about a 20-foot wide swath of HOA land, which when you tack that on, we again more than satisfy the 50-foot side yard setback from that condition. Next variance is to permit, and I continue to struggle with this one. I know Alan at one point had an explanation for why it exists, but a minimum building envelope of 20,000 square feet. We are seeking a variance to have a smaller building envelope than 20,000 square feet. Again, you apply the provisions that are intended to apply to a 3-acre lot, to a 1.5-acre lot. I think, you know, by comparison and by correlation, they would necessarily be reduced, and this would far still exceed the half of what the required ordinance, or what the ordinance would otherwise require. Again, going from 3 acres to 1.5. And I would again just reiterate that all of these conditions, the building setbacks, the side yard setback, the lot width, all of them are still far in excess, even if the zoning hearing board is ultimately inclined to grant relief, are far in excess of the 140, you know, single-family detached dwelling units that this site literally sits in the middle of. So I don't think there can be any suggestion that this would not be in strict keeping with the neighborhood and with the intensity of use. Candidly, if we were really doing something truly comparable, you'd probably be seeing a plan for 4 to 5 lots, right? At a you know, a 22,000 square foot lot, which is probably what these are all average out to be. But again, learning from our experience with the previous effort, we did scale it back a little bit from 3 to 2. The scope of relief necessary to accommodate that we just touched on, and I'll make myself or Justin Giannotti from Dynamic Engineer, who's also the applicant's cousin. So if you hate the plan, you got to really beat him up. Available for any questions that the planning commission may have.
I was there for the whole previous application at the zoning hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some questions about the existing building. There were a couple of them.
Correct.
And as I recall, 2 of them were practically collapsed, but one was still, at that time, an active house. Someone lived there.
So the 2 that are effectively collapsed are in fact the dwelling, the single-family detached dwelling.
There was an apartment house and a bank barn.
Correct. Yeah. So you have again a 2.5-story existing dwelling, a 2-story residential accessory structure which has an apartment in it. That is currently remains occupied and is probably the only occupiable structure on the property.
Someone is currently living in it?
Yes, yes. And the bank barn, which again is in, if anybody's driven by there, in advanced state of disrepair. So, to that end, there are, in fact, already two residential units on this site as we sit here today. And I don't think anybody could say that the rehabilitation of an existing single-family dwelling is against, any regulation. So, but obviously, for the reasons stated by Mary, they are in a sorry state. They were in a terrible state years ago when the effort was initially made, and candidly, they have continued to be an enforcement issue for the township. I know that the township has had repeated calls to the fee owner, not the applicant, for maintenance, grass cutting, things of that nature, which we hope to clean all that up as part of this.
Is it the current owners living in the?
No.
He
It's
rents
tenant.
it, right?
Tenant.
And is he the landscaper?
At one point it was, I don't know if it's current still, I see tenant.
Well, that kind of comes to my other question. When Mr. Pave made his presentation, he really dwelled a lot on the historic significance of it. He was bringing in newspaper clippings from weddings held there in 1895, that sort of thing. So I'm wondering whether this is of historic significance, whether it's going to need a demolition permit from the Joint Historic Commission.
It is, well, let me start by saying Gary made a tremendous amount of mistakes in that application.
I know.
Obviously that being one.
Yeah.
Trying to rely upon the historical significance.
But he did come in with all kinds of clippings from old newspapers.
Maybe,
And some of the names there are kind of historic Newtown names,
okay.
like Swanee. And I saw Trago listed there, which is a significant important Bucks County park. So is this a building of historic significance? Question.
The building was constructed between 1857 and 1860, owned by the Twinings, and built by the Twinings, who own thousands of acres here in the township. And I have a problem with taking the house down.
Well, it's pretty much down now. I mean, to be right, it was down 3 years ago, probably
No,
4 years ago that
a
Gary.
long time ago, I think it was that 2016.
It could have been, it may have been. I remember being involved in it, but I mean, that was
So-
8 years ago, so.
I think there was a write-up that was done by Jeff Marshall, who he is on the property as being historic. The building in itself, I've been in it, be happy to tour it. We're looking at other historic buildings that are in the township.
You're on the commission, correct?
Yes, I'm on the JHC. And I believe that the demolition will have to come before us. The pole barn in the back, which it is the historic pole barn, the way the access is to it from upper levels and so on, it's actually a great historic structure. Big barn, the front house has its history there. So I believe that this does have to go to the JHC, not to speak for the whole board, but I think they'll find historic value in it.
Well, and look, this, as I said, this would obviously be followed by subdivision land development, so that would typically be, I think, part and parcel of that process, which I think is, if that is the requirement, much like I can sit here and say subdivision and land development is the requirement, then we'll go through that process. And I think if as a part of that process it's determined that it meets whatever, which candidly I don't know what the minimum standards are, then we'll have to go through that process too.
So I think, in all due respect, they put the cart before the horse here. If the property is considered historic, you will not be able to take them down in your subdivision plan that's right through the center.
I agree.
Won't work.
I agree, but what I'm saying is that's probably a land development. Zoning is the horse, and which land development is the cart behind it, and this would certainly be a part of that cart. So I'm not suggesting that I disagree that might be required, but this I would suggest is the proper protocol for processing those applications. Zoning first, which required by the MPC, the township ordinance.
That part's true, but
Correct.
any recommendation we make to the supervisor would include our concerns about the issue.
Correct. I guess the question that I would have there is, and Joe, I guess you've been using the context of the existing properties that are built around there that have been developed many, many moons before we're touching this property. And they're smaller acre in size.
And they were PRDs, those
Right.
developments.
And so on. In this case, you're talking about the CN district.
Mm-hmm.
And I would personally say that there's no reason to subdivide the land. You would keep it as one lot and not allow the subdivision. And then obviously, again, if you want to restore the houses and then do something there and make this into two dwellings somehow, that could be personally fine. You guys can create that on one lot and then share possibly multiple dwellings on the lot. You guys can create your own thing. We could talk about the idea, if you're talking about zoning, right? Not that you're here for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend, I would make a motion to deny the application just based on the fact that we want to preserve our own ordinance and make sure that the lot sizes are what they should be.
Well, with respect, I mean, that argument doesn't fly here because it is in the middle of 140 single-family lots that range in size from 16,000 square feet to 39,000. These lots will be 5 times larger than the lots in the area. So I understand, and we can say that, you know, well, does it meet this criteria? But what we're not going to sit, what we can't sit here and say is that this would not be in very much keeping with the level of development and the scope of the improvements and the scope and intensity of uses in that area. Is it zone CM? Yeah, but it's surrounded by 140. It's
Right.
almost a reverse spot zone at this
So
point.
I don't think there really is a reverse spot zone.
Well, there is.
And I don't know, maybe I'm not an attorney, but
There
I
is.
don't know what the case law is on precedents with zoning. So by saying, because these other ones exist around us, now I have a right to come in here today and say that that is the reason that I can now put, because if that's the argument, and that's the best argument you're making, you shouldn't be building 2 houses, you should be building 5.
Which I said.
Which I don't think anyone's gonna be happy with, but that's the point.
I think that we should be dealing with, everybody have an opinion here, and see what they have to say. And let's talk about what the real issues are and what the secondary issues are. My sense is that whether they build two there is not as big a question as whether to do that, they have to demolish those other structures. I think that what the concern seems to be is.
Right, but they're 2 different forms, right? So we have to control what we have with the zoning.
But I haven't heard anybody else say anything about what their concerns are. So we could, you didn't really formally make a motion, you were
No, I
just
just
suggesting
said
about
that, yes.
That was a really motion, so. But I'd like to hear from everybody.
If I may, Madam Chair. We just spent an exhaustive period of time going through the comprehensive plan. And one of the things we decided was we were going to try to cleave that plan as much as possible. So you're in a conservation management district and you're asking for, you want to double the density. That's very difficult for me. And you want to decrease the lot width by 20%. I tend to think more linearly, but the way this is stated, this flies in the face of what we're trying to do.
Again,
I can't support this. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the position your client finds themselves in, but you know, we have the zoning ordinance here. We've got conservation management. We've established the density for those I mean, it's for me, it's black and white that this won't fly.
Joe, and I have to say that one of our concerns too is I think we need, the house was built in 1850, and to just bulldoze it down without the JHC getting involved and getting in there and taking a look at it. I mean, I think we should move forward with that first.
Well, I agree, again, that if that's a requirement, we will absolutely do that. I can tell you that's not achievable in that order, given the buyer's due diligence timeframes and other requirements. It's simply not. The MPC prescribes the order in which these applications are processed, and they say you get zoning before you get your land development. So I'll go as far as to say I agree that those may be required. I don't know, because candidly, this might be the first time I've ever done anything historic in Newtown Township, so it's a little exciting on top of everything else. But whatever the requirements are to designate something as such, if this property meets it, we're absolutely gonna have to go through that process. But my only commentary is, it's not proper at zoning. Zoning is the horse. Zoning is the horse. Land development and JHC, hard to the extent, if that were applicable, other advisory boards looking at other aspects of it, not that that's applicable here, but those would be in the land development part. And to respond to Mr. Christensen's comments, I agree, yes, it's obviously located in the CM, and I understand that there is a willingness and a desire to adhere to the ordinance, but the law provides explicitly for the framework and instance to deviate from the ordinance. That's why the law says, thou shalt be permitted to ask for a variance. And what it says is, here are the criteria that you need to demonstrate compliance with to be entitled to a variance. And it's not a matter of precedent. It's not a matter of us saying, well, you gotta let us do it because they're here. One of the criteria is that we must establish that the use would be in keeping and in conformance with the uses in the vicinity and in the neighborhood, and not be detrimental to the neighborhood. And given the fact that it is literally in the middle of a 140 unit neighborhood, 3 neighborhoods, that range in size from X to Y, the only reason I suggest that is because it can't be suggested that this would not be in keeping and in conformance or to the detriment of that neighborhood based on those areas.
The only comment is the 2 houses directly to the north and east, I guess, are on larger lot size. I have no idea what they are based on the zoning map.
Mhm.
They are both of larger zoning, and then directly adjacent to that is large open space property, which will probably stay open space.
Yeah, that's
You are not
second.
surrounded by basically smaller size. You have it on one side of you, look behind you, and then to the other side is for larger lots, because the house behind you actually has access on the zoning map up on.
Yeah, and that's a flag lot, so yes, I mean, the area might be more.
In that regard, you are adjacent to larger lots which continue on to what will probably be most likely open space. But with that being said, if we are only here to talk about zoning, I would be mindful of the zoning here to take their action. That's my question.
Less spoken.
No, Mary?
I'm with Warren to let the zoning hearing board decide. But I don't really know exactly. I've seen this before. I think I have the longest history here. So this is a tired comment. But houses do get demolished. And the JHC has been granted permission to document it. Is that an appropriate consideration? Because I don't know what makes a house historic. I leave that to you. Is the age of it the only qualification? Especially since it seems in really poor repair.
We just went through this with our comprehensive plan, and we kind of identified what that is. It's not just age, you can have history to the people and places that have been there. And we clearly have a write-up from Jeff Marshall, known as the historian, our official historian in our township, of this property. You can just,
Yeah, but Victoria's house fell to the ground.
well, so there's different arguments to be made that I understand it's dilapidated right now.
Yeah.
We're all talking about demolition by neglect.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get to that.
We just dealt with it on the Port Size property as well.
It's the same
Let's hear
thing.
from everybody, then we'll.
But I'm okay with the subdivision.
And the new members understand what that is, that normally the process would be that we make a recommendation to approve or not approve to the supervisors, and the not approve would basically either leave it alone, let the zoning hearing board decide, or we send our solicitor to oppose. What Mr. Blackburn is discussing, he's making his best argument. Several of the arguments are it would not be a detriment to the community, it would fit into what is already there, but there are other standards as well that are part of the tests. that is not disgusting, I'm sorry.
Well, you said not, so that'll take it.
So what we have to do is decide, first we have to understand how the process works. And even if the zoning hearing board were to say, yeah, they can move forward on it, that means it comes back here for land development. And we see a lot more information about what's going on, and we can have more information about historical issues. We can demand that. And we have our own board supervisors with their own work to do, getting updated reports from Mr. Marshall, for example, and seeing what getting a structural engineer in there to see what the cost would be to stabilize it, maintain it, repair it, whatever that would be. And these gentlemen would have to make some tough decisions, but we don't know all that stuff yet. The reason we don't is because it's not called for yet. But we should hear from what everybody is thinking, so that they have an understanding what we're concerned about, and they can take it home and think about it. Okay, so there's a couple more people, John and Alex and Joel, has you got to speak something to say
about the historic, it's nice to save historic stuff, but I mean, you said you've been to that house. If you drive by the house, that's the sore thumb in the neighborhood. It's dilapidated, it's falling down. I mean, where do you draw the line about it's old, let's save it? Where do you draw the line? Look at the problems we had with the grass humps about saving that house. And that was right up front. That was right there. Everyone could see it. This house sits back a little. Like I said, sore thumb in the neighborhood. I'm sure a lot of the people would like to see it gone and something more appropriate in line with the houses that are there. As far as allowing them to subdivide it, I mean, that's why we're reporting. But as far as saving the house, how many years have we talked about an ordinance for demolition by neglect? Right? Have we seen one yet? No. We've talked about it for years and years and years. It's not here. So I'm all for taking the house down. It's falling down now already.
And you're okay with the proposal?
So as far as you want to let them subdivide, fine. But he says, take the house down. I agree with taking the house down and replacing it with something else.
So you're okay, for the record, you're okay to send it to the zoning hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
I feel similar. I guess, again, I'm newbie here, but the way I look at it is, you got several existing structures on the property. I didn't hear square footage of the old property or whatever, but I can't imagine in terms of square footage, new versus old, much more spaces dominated by structure. You've got the improvement aspect that John talked about. You still have the open space character of the nature with 1.5 acre lots each. Again, I drove by the property too. I think whatever they're proposing to do is an improvement.
What did you see?
What did I see?
Describe it, yeah.
Well, overgrown, torn down house.
I can show you pictures.
Yeah.
Going by it. And in all honesty, I feel it look better than the one we're looking at with the whole edge, which we're talking about at this point. I didn't go inside yet, but I can do it, and I'm telling you, the pole barn is amazing. All right, so, but this is a zoning question. This isn't.
No,
I agree with that.
Let's get everybody to speak.
So you want to tear down everything and start over on that property?
That is the current plan, yes. That the subdivision and construction of 2 dwellings would necessitate the demolition of the 3
I
structures.
object to that only from the standpoint that if these buildings are deemed to be historical and can be restored to some degree, that should be considered.
And we won't know that without more information.
Right. And if they can't be restored, then they have to be torn down, then so be it.
And that's a process we'll
Yeah.
get that to the joint historic commission, and not the permit demolition.
Okay, for the record then, you're opposed to sending it to the zoning hearing without objection.
Those are the choices are, with the record and then to the supervisors. They take no position at all, and let the zoning hearing board do what it's going to do, knowing that if they approve it, we'll get it back in land development. If they deny it, they can appeal it to court. That's just the way it works.
Or changes the zone.
The choices are theirs. The other one is that we recommend that it not be approved, and we actually oppose it, and we recommend that the supervisor send our solicitor to the zoning hearing board to oppose it. Those are the two choices that we have to give to the supervisors. So,
I don't feel like we have enough information to make any of those calls.
yeah, unfortunately, that's all we have, this is all we're going to have. So, that's okay, I
That's how I would
understand.
state.
I don't think everyone's that either.
Was the Joint Historic Commission involved years ago, Mary? Maybe you would know when Hall Bay was.
Never got there, right?
It never got there. He was, his first application,
That's an order.
I have some, was to, he got a cease and desist because he was using the whole property for a business. And he wanted to continue. He had rented out to workers for the landscaping business. It was in great disrepair and stored other people's broken landscaping vehicles. And then he wanted to subdivide, but he wanted to continue to use it until. And he thought that he should be allowed to do it, that's where the historic part came in, because it had always had, it was a farm, so that's a business, and he would have in this apartment his farm workers. So what difference did it make, whether they were landscapers that have to take care of other ones, or to work the farm, was his point. It got very, very interesting, but the building's historic significance never came up. Except to say that it was being used for all kinds of things, so why not a landscaper?
And just one additional item of color, during that whole process, and again, not that this should matter, but the neighbors who participated, Mary,
They all hired lawyers,
they all wanted it down.
down completely.
The neighbors wanted it all down. They just, their whole thing was 2, not 3. But they were in unison that they wanted it down. It was traffic nuisance this, it was a nuisance that. I mean, so that was probably another reason why.
Well, each and every resident became a party
Correct.
on their own, with their own lawyers.
Correct.
And Township had Mr. Cooper. If anybody knows him, he's the world's slowest talker.
You do know. But our office ultimately got involved at the request of the township as somewhat of a mediator to try to, because the township was opposing the application, as were all the neighbors, and they asked us to get involved. And the reason I have that knowledge is because to try to find that middle ground with Gary and the neighbors, and the township kind of said, "Where do you guys figure out?" And Gary would never come off 3, and the neighbors, wanted 2, and health intervened, and just never
The goal
went.
here is for us to get through this. What about getting Mr. Cooper?
Well, he's retired, so now you have Darton or somebody, even, who knows, but.
Jerry, can you draft a resolution based on
A motion?
Or a motion?
Well,
Just one question before you
yeah,
go.
sure.
What's the hardship? No one's asked the question. What's the hardship?
Well, I will answer that in the following manner. It's a dimensional item of relief, which is, you know enough to ask that question. You know that Hertzberg requires a significantly reduced standard. It also allows for that to not be even an applicable standard, given the fact that the MPC only requires each of those criteria to be demonstrated, quote, when applicable. Having said that, I think the surrounding neighborhood, being 140 units of 0.3 acres or slightly more, would clearly demonstrate that this property, in order to be able to be developed in accordance with the neighborhood, would necessarily be developed in one, like I said before, probably dictates 4 or 5 units, but based on a comparable lot size. But it certainly does not contemplate a 3-acre lot. Putting aside the historical significance, as Mr. Gable said, there's no prohibition, I'll take his word for it, against a demo by neglect. So for no fault of the current applicants who just put the property in the contract, the property has been for decades at this point probably in an advanced and continuingly advancing state of disrepair. I can tell you flat out, there's no way any of those structures. There's not a single person who would put the money into renovating those structures. I mean, it's not. So you're either going to have a continuing attractive nuisance, rat-infested NOV problem with continuing dilapidated buildings, or we're going to have what we feel is a minimal and significant, less than what the previous effort was, development of 2, where again, there's 2 dwellings on the property now. So that's my lawyerly long-winded response to that.
I don't think you need more to it all. But I hear what you're saying.
Oh, it's a hardship.
Hardship would be to the base financial.
Yeah, the hardship is
Well, it's
community,
perceived hardship.
None of the parts of
You're arguing that they don't like it, it's there, but there's something that existed before and now on the land.
It's a public health argument.
It's public health under Hertzberg, financial is allowed to be a hardship. Well, you can exhale all you want, but the law is the law. That's a financial hardship is permitted under Hertzberg.
And this is the first opportunity for the people to ask. So, I had a sense that the majority was in favor of letting it go to the zoning hearing board without objection, or letting the zoning hearing board make any decision it wants. I could frame that motion. If, however, I hear that the majority is in favor of opposing it and sending it to the solicitor, that's a totally different motion. So at this point, I give it a pretty divided commission here. So, have you been taking a look?
Yes, it really does.
I appreciate the historical argument, I really do. I would like to go to the zoning board, I wouldn't oppose it, I don't think we should be spending money on a solicitor to go there. That to me is a financial argument for the township. To spend money on a lawyer to go there that's probably gonna get his ass handed to him, so let's go through the zoning hearing board. Let them come back to us with what they have and take into account the historical nature. If there's a way to use it, then let's do that. But if there isn't, then I think we have to bite the bullet. I've driven by that house several times over the last year. It is a beautiful property, but I gotta tell you, if I lived near there, I would be calling this township regularly.
This is a different argument.
But I don't have the money to go buy that.
And we go through it. You know, that's a different thing.
But that argument is zoning everything.
I would personally say that we should send a solicitor, and it's time to stand up for our code and our ordinance. And again, he might not win, the zoning board might grant it, I'm sure they'll go to court, and he'll use whatever he has to do. Maybe they'll change their
But
mind.
that's a lot of money to come back to where we should be doing now. And I guess it makes us all feel good to go fight the fight. But there's a dollar value associated with that.
My point is that you're also making a statement. We constantly do this.
And it costs money to make that statement.
Then why bother having laws? Why bother having?
Well, then I don't be that dramatic about it. I mean, this isn't like, everything. There's a time to go and fight, you've got to fight and change.
All right, we don't need a long discussion on it. I think what you're in favor of, I got five in favor of the sending in.
I have 5.
In favor.
Okay.
Craig, Joel, and Terry opposed.
So is this, what's the final count?
Hey, you were okay.
Well, being a member of our board, it's a shame that this house was never documented, put on the historic listed where it should have been, and,
Not much of this.
I mean, I understand it's an eyesore. Personally, I would like to, I know someone that looked at it a long time ago and said that it was a solid structure and it needed, if someone went in there with the mind, someone that loves to restore historical properties, that it could be. So it just, I mean, just to tear it down bothers me because of all that. But, I would go with sentences on a hearing board, I think.
That's the majority then.
Yeah.
Okay, and so it would be a motion to recommend to the board of supervisors that they take no position on these variances, these 5 variances, and let the zoning hearing board make its decision.
And the synopsis will reflect that we were not unanimous and that we had concerns about.
Historical nature of the property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the motion, want to make that motion?
I'll make it.
Somebody want to second it then? Okay. Vote please. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.